Clearly, the discussion as to how society should deal with marijuana is likely to continue for some time. But is marijuana the reason hemp is no longer the major industry it once was? After all, the industrial-grade hemp crop is usually almost free of THC. Furthermore, the United Nations Single Convention on Drugs in 1985 states, "This convention shall not apply to the cultivation of the cannabis plant exclusively for industrial purposes, fibre and seed, or horticultural purposes." In spite of all this, the answer to the question is still partly a yes. Marijuana prohibition directly limits the full potential of industrial hemp. Firstly, hemp is only permitted to grow in the most remote locations. Then there are police checks on potential growers. Then application fees, licenses, policing fees, and marijuana testing fees for industrial crops can be many hundreds and even thousands of dollars per year. If, through no fault of the farmer, the crop exceeds the ridiculously low legal THC level, the crop must be instantly destroyed. The cannabis plant developed THC to protect itself from ultraviolet rays and insects. The modern requirement to breed out THC compromises the cannabis plant's remarkable ability to cope with hot, dry conditions, high altitudes, and to be grown organically without the use of pesticides. And lastly, the present laws tend to promote large-scale production when hemp has a naturally useful place on small farms and in most backyard veggie gardens. But there are also other less obvious reasons for hemp's repression. Hemp historian Gatewood Galbraith speaks from his home state of Kentucky.
There are 14 of these historical markers around the central Kentucky commemorating hemp as a cash crop in the state. It's pretty self-explanatory. We were the world's largest producer for over 100 years.
How did hemp go from being a major crop to almost non-existence in a span of around 50 years?
Historical research conducted by our company suggests that it was the discovery of an efficient hemp decorticating machine and the promised resurgence of hemp to industry that led to the imposition of legal sanctions in the United States and the demise of the hemp industry.
In the early 1930s, the American hemp industry remained highly labour-intensive long after competing industries had mechanised. Furthermore, other fibres like manila hemp had begun to be imported from underdeveloped countries where labour was dirt cheap. By 1930, the hemp industry bottomed out at 1,000 acres. But hemp technology finally caught up, and the crop expanded to 14,000 acres in the next 7 years. Hemp was poised to become the new billion-dollar crop, as reported in Popular Mechanics and Mechanical Engineering magazines, written in early 1938. A factory in Illinois had begun producing fine bond paper from hemp fibre. Hemp with its high cellulose content could also now be made into, quote, more than 25,000 products ranging from dynamite to cellophane and all manner of plastics. But in the mid-30s, DuPont Chemicals patented processes to make nylon and plastics from oil and coal.
A resurgence of the hemp industry would seriously have threatened the emerging petrochemical industries, with their synthetic fibre nylon being invented in 1935.
Hearst was a big printer back during the 20s and 30s, and he had vast interest in timberland for paper pulp, which could be used as a result of a chemically intensive paper pulp process developed by DuPont and patented by DuPont. They made their fortunes with these chemical shipments for the paper pulp industry, and hemp represented a less chemically intensive way of manufacturing a higher grade paper. Consequently, DuPont saw it as an economic competitor.
William Randolph Hearst, the owner of the largest newspaper chain in the United States between the world wars, started publishing newspaper articles linking cannabis with violent crime. They renamed the plant marijuana to dissociate it from the hemp medicines, the hemp rope and fabric that Americans had been using profitably for generations. Many stories in his papers told of blacks or Mexicans using marijuana and being disrespectful or violent to whites, or trying to push their drug to innocent whites. The campaign succeeded in getting racist white organisations to support cannabis prohibition. Hearst and Harry Anslinger, the then director of the Bureau of Narcotics, managed to get marijuana made illegal in 1937, thus destroying the hemp industries. This timing is interesting. The alcohol prohibition had just ended, and the people who had enforced it needed new jobs. This may well be why Anslinger pushed so hard to get cannabis banned.
In Anslinger's words, if the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster marijuana, he would drop dead of fright. Reefer Madness was one of the many movies made to whip up an anti-marijuana frenzy.
The sale of marijuana is even more difficult to detect and halt than the traffic in drugs such as opium, morphine, and heroin. More deadly even than these soul-destroying drugs is the menace of marijuana. Under the influence of the drug, he killed his entire family with an axe. It is convinced that he is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted. It is recommended, Your Honor, that the defendant be placed in an institution for the criminally insane for the rest of his natural life.
The prohibitionist mentality was abhorred by our founding fathers and by Lincoln and by every other great leader in America. They never had the power to prohibit, but they soon gave themselves the power to tax. The laws which outlawed marijuana were not prohibitive criminal statutes. They were tax acts. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, where an ounce of marijuana was taxed at $200, and it was selling on streets for $1.
At that time, congressmen voting on this piece of legislation were not aware that marijuana was hemp, cannabis hemp, that country had been using profitably for centuries. The hemp prohibition was initiated by American petrochemical companies in the 1930s to destroy the economic potential of hemp.
Despite hemp being a major fibre crop in America and the world last century, mention of hemp has been erased from museums and textbooks. This display on the history of American textiles in Washington's Smithsonian Institute contains no mention of hemp. When asked why, museum curator Arkido replied, "Children don't need to know about hemp anymore, it confuses them." Similarly, in the National Textile Museum, there is no mention of hemp, either on display or in the library catalogue. Another example of the hemp cover-up was the attempted destruction of all traces of the US Department of Agriculture's film, Hemp for Victory. This film, made in 1942, was used to encourage patriotic US farmers to grow hemp for the war effort. After 45 years of burial in government archives, it was rediscovered in 1989 by hemp activists.
In 1942, 14,000 acres of fibre hemp were harvested in the United States. The goal for 1943 is 300,000 acres. Thus, hemp, Cannabis sativa, the old standby cordage fiber, is staging a strong comeback. American hemp will go on duty again. Hemp for mooring ships, hemp for tow lines, hemp for tackle and gear, hemp for countless naval uses, both on ship and shore. Hemp for victory.
Straight after the war, however, the government once again abolished the hemp industry and eventually criminalised the plant.